The Grotmas Gits are here! A festive themed loom boss and cheeky snotlings atop their trusty cave squig mount. And of course, its fang-filled maw is stuffed with presents. What's not to love about this seasonal mini? In this video, we'll be showing you how to paint your Grotmas Gits to a battle-ready standard so that they'll be ready for Squigmas in no time at all. The paints we'll be using are on screen now, but remember that these are just our suggestions, and you're free to use whatever you like. Here's also a list of the additional equipment we've used. Same again, use whatever works for you. We've undercoated our mini with Grey Sear spray. We'll be using lots of different contrast paints on our Grotmas Gits, so Grey Sear works great. You can also use Wraithbone if you wanted to. We'll start by painting the coat, belt and claws using Black Legion. We'll be applying it straight from the pot here, there's no need to add any water. Black Legion is heavily pigmented and fast flowing, so it's super easy to apply. We'll only be applying one layer of this, but if you want a stronger tone of black, once the first layer has completely dried, you can add another one if you want to. We finished applying all the Black Legion, but we have made a few mistakes. That's okay though, we can easily fix those up. We're now going to use some Grey Sear from the pot to neaten up our mistakes. Because we're going to be using contrast paints over these areas later, we need to make sure the mistakes are covered up. Otherwise, they will show through underneath our contrast paints. We'll thin it down with some water first, and then apply the Grey Sear in 2 thin layers over all those rogue blotches of Black Legion. Once we finish tidying up, we can move on to adding our other colours. Next, we're going to use Barl Red straight from the pot to paint the squig. This is another heavily pigmented contrast paint, so it's super fun and easy to apply. Get a load of paint onto your brush and then pick a point on your squig to start on. We're applying lots of paint, so it creates that natural shading and highlights that contrast paints are known for. If we don't apply enough Barl Red, we won't get this effect, so it's really important that we get loads onto the model. You'll only need one layer of this, but make sure to let it completely dry before moving on. We've finished applying all the Barl Red to the squig, and now it looks awesome. The next step is to paint all the eyes on our Grotmas Gits, as well as the festive swirls on the candy cane and some of the presents. For this, we'll be using Mephiston Red, thinned down with a small amount of water. Because we're only painting small areas, you should only need one layer of this. But both the eyes and swirls are quite intricate details, so take your time. Using a small brush here will help us be extra careful. With that said, it's not a problem if we do make any mistakes. Just like we showed you before, we can always go back with Grey Sear and fix them up. If you're really struggling, remember that you don't have to add any swirls onto your model if you don't want to. We've completed all the eyes and swirls on our Grotmas Gits, and now we can move on to adding some other colours. Those swirls were super tricky, but they'll make our Gits really stand out when the model is complete. We're now going to use Skeleton Horde straight from the pot to paint the antlers, sack and teeth. You'll only need to add one layer of this, but just like with our Barl Red, we will be adding a lot, so make sure to let it fully dry before moving on. We're also going to thin down some Skeleton Horde with some contrast medium in a 1:4 mix and use it to paint over all the areas we added swirls to. This will add a nice subtle tint to that colour. With all the Skeleton Horde applied, our paint job's really starting to come together. Next up, it's Steel Legion Drab. We'll be using this to pick out the base of the antlers, a couple patches, and some of the boxes too. How can we forget about this tiny base rim as well? How much you pick out with Steel Legion Drab is completely up to you. But if you're unsure, check the box art out for some inspiration. Just like with the rest of our base paints, we'll be thinning this down with some water first, and applying it in 2 thin layers. Just make sure the first layer is completely dry before you move on to the second one. Now onto Rhinox Hide. We'll be applying this to any shoes and belts across our Grotmas Gits. You can also paint all the string and the top of the antlers with this. Once again, 2 thin layers will do the trick. A cool thing you can do is actually dry brush some Rhinox Hide between the 2 colours on the antlers. Work some Rhinox Hide into a small dry brush with some kitchen towel or cardboard, and then gently flick your brush in between both colours. This will slowly create a nice colour transition. Take your time until you're happy with the result. This isn't the last we'll see of dry brushing in this video, so if you want to know more about it, check out our dry brushing video in our Painting Essentials playlist for some extra info. With that step complete, our squig antlers are nearly complete. All they need now is a light dry brush of Ushabti bone. We can actually apply the dry brush slightly heavier towards the bottom of each antler to make that part lighter. While we've got Ushabti bone on our brush, we can also dry brush the gift sack. Then we can switch to a small layer brush, thin our paint down with some water, and highlight the teeth. That quick step has really helped to make our model come together. The antlers are pretty much done. We just need to paint the ears with 2 thin layers of Mournfang Brown. And there we are! The antlers are done, and now we can focus on the rest of the model. Time for another fun bit. It's time to paint the skin on all our Grotmus Gits. We'll be using Gut Ripper Flesh, straight from the pots for this. We've got quite a few colours on our model now, so just be as careful as you can when you paint around them. Don't worry if you do make any mistakes though, you know the drill, we can always go back afterwards and fix them up. You'll only need one layer of this, but make sure it's completely dry before moving on. All the Gut Ripper Flesh has now dried, and we can see that just that single contrast paint has created a really cool skin tone for our cheeky grots. Speaking of just a single contrast paint creating an awesome effect, we're now going to use Gryph-Charger Grey to paint the tree. Gryph-Charger Grey is great here because it has a greeny blue tone. That, combined with the grey sear showing through underneath, creates a cool frosty look. We'll only be applying one coat of this, but you're free to add more if you want a stronger colour. With that tree branch looking complete, we can move on to the gold. For all the areas we want to be gold, we'll be using Retributor Armour. We're going to pick out the baubles as well as all the ribbon on the gifts. Seeing as this isn't a contrast paint, we'll thin it down with a small amount of water first and then apply it in 2 thin layers. We've finished using Retributor Armour to paint all the gold, and that simple metallic has made our Grotmus Gits look all the more festive. At this point, we'll change our paint mortar. We don't want any pesky metallic flakes left behind by the Retributor Armour contaminating our other colours. Next, we're going to move on to Screamer Pink to paint the gums of our squig. You can also pick out the eyelids too. This can be quite tricky. Not to worry, use the smallest brush you have and just be as careful as you can. Remember, we can always go back to our other paints to clean up any mistakes we make, so just try your best if you're feeling up to it. With the Screamer Pink added, our squig is nearly complete. Now it's time to paint all those gifts and tiny toys our cheeky gits have stolen. We'll start off with Talazar Blue to pick out one of the gifts in the squig's mouth, as well as this tiny Space Marine and paint pot too. We can also pick out some of the baubles. Because we painted these in Retributor Armour earlier, that metallic shine will show through underneath and create a really cool effect. This same effect will work with any contrast paint. So if we want to, we can go back to Bar Red and use that to create some more traditional Squigmus baubles. You can pick whichever colour you like for the baubles, or better yet, use a few different colours. For the remaining few gifts, we'll be painting these in the exact same way as Talazar Blue. We'll paint these 2 gifts with Volupus Pink. A good trick is to apply loads of contrast paint at once. This way, it will naturally pull towards the bottom of each gift and create a really nice colour transition from dark to light. But we still have to be careful not to put too much on. As you can see here, we put way too much on, and the paint has run down onto our other colours. Not to worry though, we can fix this easy. Soak up all the excess paint with a dry brush, and then wipe the area with a damp brush. This will fix it up quite nicely. For the last gift, we'll use Aldari Emerald, a nice festive green. With all our gifts and baubles completed, we can move on to shading all the white areas. This includes the white part of the coat, and of course all that snow. We'll be using 1 part Apothecary White, combined with 1 part Contrast Medium for this. We recommend switching to a larger brush for the base, as it's much larger. We're using a medium shade brush for our base. And with that Apothecary White applied, we've finished our Loom Boss's coat and finished that wintry landscape. There's only a few things left to paint now. One of those areas is our squig's eyes. We're going to pick these out with some Imperial Fist, straight from the pot. Now this will only work over our grey sear undercoat, so if your squig's eyes have gotten a little messy, just tidy them up first. We'll also pick out one of the last remaining gifts in our squig's mouth, but you can use a different colour for this if you want to. It's shade time! Next, we're going to use Agrax Earthshade, straight from the pot, to shade some areas. We'll be applying this to all the Steel Legion drab and the string around the base of the antlers too. We can also apply this to the boots and to the eyes of our squig if we want to. You don't have to do this step if you don't want to, but if you do decide to add some Agrax Earthshade, it's super fun and easy to use. Just remember to watch out for any pooling, and if you do notice any, simply tidy it up with a dry brush. Now shade paints can take a while to fully dry. We recommend leaving your model for about 40 minutes to an hour before painting over any of the shaded areas. If you do want to know more about shading, check out our video in the Painting Essentials playlist all about it. For our next shade, we'll be using Reikland Flesh Shade to define all the gold on our model. While we're at it, we can also shade these tiny ears on the antlers and all our Grotmus Gits teeth. Once again, you don't have to do this step if you don't want to, but adding shades like this is super easy and really helps our models look good on the gaming table. With that stage complete, we're done adding shades to our Grotmus Gits, and there's just a couple stages left standing between them and Squigmus. We're now going to use Abaddon Black, thinned down with some water, to paint the last gift in our squig's mouth, as well as a few remaining patches around our model and anything we may have missed. You could also switch to a smaller brush to dot the squig's eyes. This can be quite tricky, so just take your time and be as careful as you can. Once we've finished applying Abaddon Black to our model, all that's left is to paint the rim of the base. Of course, you can do this in whatever colour you fancy, but seeing as we've already got it onto our palette, we'll be using Abaddon Black. With that done, our Grotmus Gits are ready for Squigmus. Before they steal any presents though, we'll show you a great way to wrap up this paint job. A light all over dry brush of Screaming Skull will add some subtle highlights to our Gits. We'll work some Screaming Skull onto our brush, and then once we're ready, gently flick our brush across the whole model. Not only will this add some subtle highlights to our model, but it will also tie all those colours together and create a more cohesive look. How could we forget to add some Brimstone Firegrass tufts? After all, they look like bundles of tinsel. Tinsel tufts? And there we are. Our Grotmus Gits are ready to dash through the snow and steal Squigmus. This was a super fun model to paint. It's perfect if you're feeling festive or just looking to get in the spirit of Grotmus. It's always interesting to paint something a little bit different. For more tutorials, tips and tricks, check out some of the other videos on the Warhammer YouTube channel. Or you can head to your local Warhammer store where our amazing staff will be happy to help. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this video. Happy holidays. Bye bye.